Hi, I'm Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of Regulator. Welcome to this week's Regulatory Roundup here in the beautiful Finger Lakes region of New York. We needed to get out of our Hoboken condo so the little one could run free, see grass, animals, and lots of bugs. There's a caterpillar right there. This week, there were 967 alerts from 233 unique U.S. regulators, and 255 had to do with coronavirus. The regulator of the week is the SEC. Of all the federal regulators, the SEC seems to be the most focused on business as usual. This week included the 2020 Municipal Securities Disclosure Conference, where much was discussed, including a decision by the SEC to grant conditional temporary exemptions from broker registration for registered municipal advisors. But there was also tangential drama associated with the SEC. The Trump administration nominated Carolyn Crenshaw to be a member of the SEC and then announced the intent to nominate SEC Chairman Jay Clayton to be the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. A lot of drama ensued on Friday and Saturday, largely ignored by the media. But if you're into governmental gossip, Google the names Jay Clayton or Jeffrey Berman. Finally, there's a kerfuffle going on with the SEC and a number of exchanges. The SEC directed them and FINRA to come up with a new National Market System Plan, which is basically a plan that controls how equity market data is managed. The SEC wanted the industry to come up with one big plan as opposed to sort of fragmented plans, but then NASDAQ filed a petition with the courts to stop the SEC from going forward until certain issues were resolved. Long story short, this week the SEC denied their request, saying that they had overstated the harm that will result from their compliance with the SEC's order. The topic of the week, senior scams. It was World Elder Abuse Day, and the regulators took notice. President Trump hosted a roundtable discussion on fighting for American seniors. The North American Securities Administrators Association testified before Congress about state securities regulators and what they're doing to root out and shut down frauds related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of these schemes are targeting vulnerable senior investors who are experiencing unprecedented quarantines and loneliness, and it's just the perfect storm. Since March 1st, the Texas State Securities Board has opened more than 145 investigations into suspect securities fraud or otherwise illegal investment opportunities in Texas alone. The IRS also issued a reminder to nursing homes and other care facilities that the economic impact payments generally belong to the recipients and not the organizations that provide care. For those of you following social justice issues, the Washington Insurance Commissioner is actually calling on the insurance industry to end its use of credit scoring in auto, property, renters, and life insurance because of not only the COVID-19 impact, but also the institutionalization of racial discrimination in those areas. There was a lot of celebration across the U.S. last week related to the Supreme Court DACA ruling, the LGBTQ ruling, and Juneteenth. 17 states, plus HUD and the White House, issued Juneteenth statements and proclamations. Also in social justice, Idaho's governor formed two new committees, one to create a plan for reopening public schools this fall, and the other to create a plan to address the digital divide, which is a term that describes the inequity between students' access to remote learning across Idaho. Georgia introduced legislation to end racial profiling by law enforcement agencies. Certain counties in Georgia, however, issued statements in support of local police. Massachusetts has filed a bill to implement a new police officer certification system. There were also a number of government-directed investments post-pandemic and protesting that were interesting. Illinois announced a $900 million package of equity-driven community and business grant programs. It was announced alongside members of the Black, Latino, and Asian caucuses of the state legislature And these grants are supposed to support companies and businesses that were impacted by the pandemic and recent civil unrest. Indiana announced a new partnership with Indiana Black Expo to increase access to economic and workforce recovery programs for minority employers. New Jersey's governor announced plans to develop the New Jersey Wind Port, which is a staging area for offshore wind products on the East Coast. The state is committed to using union labor to construct the wind port and intends to set a new standard for inclusion of minority and women workers and business owners. Construction is targeted to begin in 2021. There were also some government investment announcements having nothing to do with social justice, but still interesting nonetheless. HUD delivered a report to the White House about best practices regarding Opportunity Zone investments. Georgia reopened its film industry, which plays a key role in the state's economy. Virginia announced 26 grants to commercialize university research in clean energy, cybersecurity, data analytics, life sciences, and unmanned systems. In our Find Tracker, this is what I just have to point out because the headline was so funny. The Texas State Securities Board issued an emergency cease and desist order, which I admit is one of the most entertaining statement of facts I've ever read. Basically, some repeat criminals got caught a second time ripping people off. But the actual press release from the agency was hysterical. The article is entitled, "Today's Texas State Securities Board action is best served with a caffeinated beverage. It's a long read about long-running oil and gas bad actors." For those of you following LIBOR, the CFPB issued proposals to amend Reg Z, the truth in lending, but also a bunch of rules around home equity lines of credit and credit cards. For those of you following cannabis, Virginia announced a new hemp processing facility that will be able to process up to 5,000 pounds of industrial hemp per day, primarily grown by local farmers, most of whom are current or former tobacco farmers. The Iowa governor signed a bunch of bills into law, including HF 2581, which is an act relating to the regulation of hemp, including testing methods and penalties and effective dates and all that sort of stuff around hemp. So if you're following that space, take a look at Iowa. For those of you following SROs, FINRA proposed rules having to do with Reg BI, a topic I know many of you are following. Also, a number of exchanges have been updating their disciplinary action rules. It was a big week in privacy, starting with the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. They released a draft privacy bill, the Data Accountability and Transparency Act of 2020. It is a sweeping new framework that aims to protect personal information, ensuring that it's not used for discriminatory purposes, as well as a total ban on the use of facial recognition technology. The proposal also establishes a new independent agency dedicated to protecting Americans' privacy rights. The Secretary of Homeland Security has determined that the renewal of Data Privacy and Integrity Advisory Committee is necessary and in the public interest, and so they are seeking applicants to get appointed to the committee. The FTC and the Bureau of Consumer Protection announced that PrivacyCon 2020 will be held virtually on July 21st. 38 state attorney generals are petitioning Google and Apple to ensure contact tracing and exposure notification applications related to COVID-19 will protect consumers' personal information. In the same breath with all of this privacy stuff, the SBA and Treasury actually announced enhanced transparency regarding the Paycheck Protection Program. The SBA is going to be disclosing the business names, addresses, NAICS codes, zip codes, business type, demographic data, nonprofit information, jobs supported, and the loan amount ranges for all the PPP loans. And since we're on the PPP, SBA and Treasury have announced their new easy and revised full forgiveness applications, so check it out. Finally, in state news, Idaho has a new law requiring additional disclosure and filing requirements for annuity sales to Idaho consumers. That is it this week for Regulator's US Alerts. Join us rain or shine every Wednesday morning on LinkedIn and the longer version on YouTube, which covers non-financial topics.